this is that negative thought you've been having, and I just can't let you try and change yourself without a fight. So go ahead and just turn this show off, okay? And yeah, everything's still fine.
This is Blindsight with your host, Bill Lundgren. We aren't holding back truth. We're here to help you heal and become the best you possible. Here's the chair. Here's the pillow. Here's Bill.
Okay, good morning, America. This is Blindsight, a program on mental health and blindness, which is supported and sponsored by your Audio Information Network of Colorado. Welcome, and I'm Bill Lundgren, your host for this program. And today we're going to do something a little different in that rather than a speaker or a guest, I want to offer some ideas of situations that particularly parents and partners may get into, and talk about what kind of options may be available. I have two case studies, and what I'll say to you, to be absolutely clear, these are not specific people. These are kind of amalgams of situations that I just want to use as an example that people may find bits and pieces apply to them. But it's also a way for me to introduce the idea that I need some help from you out there in internet land, podcast land, to give me some feedback, to tell me how you like the podcast, and also what kinds of situations that you know about or want to know about that we can possibly use on the air. The crucial thing for you to understand is that all information I may get from you will be held strictly confidential. I may have to alter some information in order to provide that confidentiality, but it's very important to me that your neighbors don't know what you're asking me for everybody's protection. So I'll tell you more about that at the end of the program. But I want to go to one case that I think kind of covers a lot of areas that I want to get across to people. And this is a situation about Joe, who's a 24-year-old who had a major mishap that resulted in brain injury, and the brain injury resulted in his blindness. This is fairly recent. And in this case, the father is concerned about his son drinking. And his son has been exhibiting a fair amount of drinking and a fair amount of aberrant behavior. And so the situation would be where a parent is coming to me or to this broadcast and saying, what do I do? How do I intervene? How do I stop this? What do I do for this person? And there are a number of facets of this that I want to point out and mention to you. First off, when you're working with a 24-year-old or anyone under 26, you're working with someone whose brain has not fully developed yet. The latest research that we have shows that brain development continues until around age 26, which is the reason that age bracket that between teenager and 26 is the frontal lobe, which has the newest part of the brain developmentally, is where the review process of what's correct behavior and incorrect behavior. That is, if anything disturbs that frontal lobe, such as alcohol, then the connection between action and consequences is out the window, which may in fact be involved here, because with brain injury, we find, depending on where the injury is, the brain becomes extra sensitive to alcohol, the presence of alcohol. So the smaller amounts of alcohol can produce much greater effect than it would be if there was no brain injury. So we have somebody who's already in trouble from the standpoint of the effect of alcohol on his brain. And also because he's younger, all the connections may not be there to make rational decisions. So that's for starters. The other piece that I, as a therapist, have to pay attention to is the trauma of the brain injury and the blindness is a factor that has to be dealt with. A lot of times, well, let me put it this way. When someone who has an alcohol problem comes to me, I very rarely get someone who has just an alcohol problem. There are other things that are involved which have to be dealt with. In this case, we have the trauma of the brain injury. We have the effect of the alcohol on an injured brain. And we have the trauma of this event. And also the self-esteem issues, the grief that goes on when one has lost a faculty, in this case, their sight, and especially at that age, they're just starting out in the world, trying to make their way in the world. It's any number of blows that have occurred to the person in addition to what caused the injury, the emotional blows. So that as a therapist, then I have to look at, the depression, grief, which are two different things. The grief for the loss of faculty, but perhaps the depression in terms of his self-esteem, plus the brain injury, making a complicated package, but one that that can be dealt with if properly handled. Now, in this case, the father is asking, what do I do? Which brings me then to an important subject in terms of how do you intervene with someone who may be misusing alcohol. And, whether it's alcoholic or alcohol abuse, whichever, we talk about alcoholism as the addiction, alcohol abuse is, maybe in this case, it's just simply unable to manage the alcohol. What do the parents do? What does the family do? And there's a lot of resources out there that can help in this kind of situation for the parents. What we call intervention. That is, there are people certainly in the Colorado area, who specialize in intervention, where they can help the family figure out how to intervene in a situation like this. The important thing certainly here is that it has to be done with love and kindness. I know that someone who's being very abusive, let's say under the influence of alcohol, you don't feel a lot of kind feeling towards that person, but that's one of the first things that you have to develop, because what you're dealing with is someone who's not the person that you once knew. But what you can do is to talk to the person, to outline what you have observed of the person's behavior, and do it in a matter-of-fact kind of way, not accusatory or anything like that, to say, okay, when last Saturday you were drinking and this happened and this happened and this happened, and it made it very difficult for me to be around you, or whatever, but not yelling and screaming, which a lot of people feel like needs to happen. So an interventionist can help a whole family intervene with someone, particularly someone who's had a serious alcohol problem, Or you can decide, okay, I'm going to sit down with a person and I'm going to be very factual and also outline a consequence. For example, I can't be around you when you're drinking, but, when you're not drinking, I'm here for you and so forth. And that sometimes can be the right consequence, but there's also has to be a conclusion. For example, if you do your homework, if you were that parent or that family member doing the homework to find a program or a counselor that would help a situation like this, and then be able to say, look, I have the phone number of John Doe, who's a counselor. He seems to be the appropriate person for this situation. Would you see him or her? And encourage the person then not to feel like they're being judged or there's something wrong with them per se as a person, but to talk with someone about what's going on. And as I say, that person has to be able to deal with grief, depression, with the drinking, and the interaction that's going on, and with the understanding also of brain injury and the effects of brain injury in there. If the person were a true alcoholic, then the interventionist would be good to be involved, because then an interventionist brings together the significant people in the person's life, and you have several meetings and come up with basically what the individual family members are going to say to that person at an intervention. And is everybody in agreement with the outcome that everybody wants? In other words, to go into treatment or to what exactly it is, so that the family and the interventionists are meeting with that person as a unified team. And that can be a lot of work. But at the end, it does help to break down the defenses. That is the idea that they're doing just fine, which is what everyone in this situation is an alcoholic or is alcohol abusing. Really, their ability to understand what's going on is shot. And consequently, you have to break through that, help them to understand what they've been in denial about in terms of their behavior, and to agree then to go into some kind of treatment or to see a therapist in order to change their behavior. And that's in a nutshell the kind of thing that can be involved in helping someone with that kind of situation. And it's very necessary, because if the person's on that cycle and going, they're not going to stop unless they get some help in understanding what can happen if they continue the way they are. And that's where the family becomes very important, but most helpful too is to understand that yelling and punishment and so forth is not going to work, or is most likely not to work, and certainly creates a barrier between the parent and the son, and further helps the son feel less and less secure, or feel less validated. So what you want to do is support the person, but not support the behavior. That's the separation that that parents need to understand. And the part that I would also, with this individual, with the parent that let's say came to me, I would also encourage the parents to get some counseling for themselves, because seeing a beloved son go blind and the kind of behavior that is exhibited, that's got to be have a tremendous impact on the parent. And they need some support in dealing with the trauma of having a son or daughter, whoever it happens to be, having go through this trauma and they have no control. That's the parents need to get some help for themselves in that kind of a situation. So I hope that that explanation can give you some sense of what you may encounter or you may find other people encounter. And one of the things that the AIN of Colorado is trying to do is develop resources for families. And you can always check in with us to see who you might refer to if you were in this kind of a situation. And if you, frankly, if you see someone that you think we ought to have on our resource, let us know. The counselor, whatever. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end of this program.
You're listening to Blindsight with Bill Lundgren. If you enjoy what you hear, please visit aincolorado.org for more shows, news, and articles read by our amazing staff and volunteers. If you have a question for Bill or would like to recommend a guest for future shows, please visit aincolorado.org/podcast-guest. Welcome to Blindsight.
All right, the second situation is a marriage counseling situation where a couple are kind of falling out of love because one of the husband has diabetes and is losing his eyesight. And the wife tells him, I don't know if I can stay in this marriage because nothing seems to be happening. It's just a deterioration. And he reports, I feel worthless. I feel like there's nothing I can do. My eyesight is going. I've lost my job. And I'm just sitting around the house. I don't know what to do because I'm, when you're blind, you're nothing. So that person would say. Now that's a whole different ball game, particularly when the marriage is breaking up or a threat of breaking up is happening. And, the husband may be very dependent. The wife may be working and be very dependent. And for the male sex, we've been socialized to be the breadwinner, to be the one that is the stoic, the John Wayne syndrome, as we call it, where, those who are old enough to remember John Wayne movies, he would ride off into the sunset with 3 bullets in his belly and not wince or give any sign of any emotion, and ride off in the sunset. That's the way we men were taught. So when a husband becomes disabled, that just blows everything to smithereens, and the wife may have to pick up the pieces, and it may be too much of a burden for the wife or the partner to handle, and they may get very frustrated and want out of it, which further increases the feeling that the individual who's losing his sight is feeling of lower and lower self-esteem. What can I do? This feeling of helplessness. Again, if the person is able to go seek counseling, the counselor may, in fact, certainly I would recommend couples counseling to help each member of the party to talk about what's going on. It's one of the reasons I chose in giving this case study is the husband is the one who is losing his sight, partially because in that case, it's the wife tend to stay with the marriage. If it's the wife that's losing her sight, or if the wife is an alcoholic, for example, the husband is most likely to leave, to drop the marriage. That's kind of a minus part on us as males, that we tend to, say, well, she's not going to be there for me. I'm out of here. But the wife does tend to stay. And again, for the wife to make that decision can be a momentous one in which she may need to, she and they need to talk about, okay, what are we doing? How can I help my husband develop more self-esteem? What does he need to do? And the problem is, again, as many people who are blind know, unemployment amongst those who are vision impaired is very high. It's about 1/3 is the statistic that I've seen of blind people are employed. And I might add that a vast majority of those, in fact, are skilled in Braille. That's distinguishing, because that does help them to become more employable. Now, I have to say, I learned Braille myself, but I don't use it at all, preferring audio to do the job for me. But, that's the statistics I have to point out. But for the husband, it becomes imperative that he is able to develop a sense of competency. And one of the ways that he can do that, one of the places that he can do that, is certainly the training centers that are throughout the country, which are designed with adult programs to teach newly blind people job skills, basic skills. That's how I came to Denver, because my vision was deteriorating as an adult, and I had a private practice and had suspended that for 10 months, came here to Denver to go through such a training program, and learned that I could function and, cook and, do the things that needed to allow myself to continue my private practice, and to feel like, okay, I can do this. And it was very a wonderful experience for me in terms of getting my self-esteem back. And so something like that can be very beneficial. The problem here can be if the wife has to, or the partner, the spouse has to be able to let go of the partner to return to independence, because sometimes in a relationship, the person who's sighted may kind of like that control that they have over the person who is who's blind or disabled in some way. And it's a very unconscious thing, but that's when they feel like they're in charge, and sometimes that can be very energizing. And they may say they don't like being in charge of the family, but I've had experiences where I've worked with couples, and in this case, alcohol had disabled the husband, the wife, after he gets sober and starts able to take control of his life and his family, she leaves and she marries another alcoholic because she likes that kind of control, all unconscious. And unfortunately, that never came up, in our sessions together. And so it was never identified. But that's something that, is a reality that people have to pay attention to and be watchful of if you're going to make a marriage work. So those are, and in that case, then we're talking about the wife may need to get therapy, couples therapy, definitely, and also most likely be helpful to at least be getting some basic training on how to survive in, a treatment center, voc rehab, to help to be able to be independent within a marriage. And that can be the healthiest thing for everybody. Again, the person who, particularly if the blindness was traumatic, but I think in terms of helping the person who is losing their sight to understand that life is not over. And I'm sure many of you who are listening to this program know that. And if you think about how did you get that message that life wasn't over because because of blindness, and that's the message we have to get out to people. So those are just a couple of instances where someone may need to, or a family or partners need to take a look at counseling as an option. And there are counselors out there. One of the things that we here at the AIN of Colorado is looking at, can we find therapists, counselors who are familiar with working with people who are blind? And unfortunately, we haven't done this successfully. That is, as a nation, we've not been paying attention to that kind of specialty because we haven't been asked for it. I know as a therapist who lost his sight late, and I would go to these workshops and conferences, I'd be the only blind counselor there, and I know that there are other blind people. So that's why I'm turning to you and saying, look, if you know of anyone, know any blind counselors, tell them to contact us so we may be able to use them as guest speakers if they have a specialty. We may be able to at least have a list of those people in the area who are experienced in working with blind people, because it is, this is something that you ought to be asking for if you go to see a counselor. Is there experience in working with people who are blind, not because we're some odd duck, but because they're as you know, there are certain aspects of life that is different for a blind person than for a sighted person. And it helps for a counselor to understand that, and also to understand one of the first things that counselors need to understand when they meet someone who is blind, how important is the blindness in terms of the work that we need to do. If you have somebody who's well adjusted to their blindness, then you can put that aside and work on whatever, depression or whatever. If it's someone who's newly blind, then you have to alter, your treatment somewhat to be able to deal with the, I'll call it trauma or the grief of the loss of eyesight in terms of re-entry into the sighted world. So those are just two things I wanted to share with you. But what I think I also want to keep reiterating that this program, the success of this podcast, is going to be helped a lot by you participating by sending us an email if you like the program or don't like my style or whatever, that's fine. I might be off in the corner crying hearing these criticisms, but that's not your problem. That's mine. All joking aside, if you have a criticism, we want to hear it. If you have something that you want us to focus on, love to hear it, because that'll help us to put together the kind of podcast that will be helpful to all of you who spend the time listening. And with that, I will sign off. Bill Lundgren for Blindsight, and look forward to talking with you again.